Hello, welcome to Jazz Is
Jazz's
MasterClass series
at the National Jazz Museum at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem.
I am Sekou McMiller, the Curator of Special Projects.
My name is Albert Marquez, Sekou Farrell.
My name is Shirazette Tennant.
And we are in conversation with the legendary Bertha Hope. Jazz could only have happened here in America.
The key to everything was the radio.
So this world is too dense. 15 minutes isn't enough to cover it all.
Are you ready? I am.
Very first beginning of Harlem, no, but Harlem Renaissance, what happens during Harlem Renaissance is absolutely an outcome of Black culture and community.
And welcome back to Jazz Is MasterClass series at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. I'm Sekou McMiller. I'm the Curator of Special Projects, and we are here in conversation with Asia Burrell Wood. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So we've been talking about jazz, culture, and justice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so we spoke about like what that meant to you,
Mm-hmm.
and what it looked like when jazz as culture. And so then we spoke a little bit about like how, what birthed jazz, right? The birth of jazz, if you will, in a loose way. And then, so now I was just wondering, like, we talked about the kind of elements that kind of push to have jazz be created. And then I just wonder, do you see hints of that or of the culture show up in jazz? Like
It's not hints of it, the culture.
Okay.
It's all there. It is Black culture, it is Black community. While it does expand and it becomes global, and it is global, and jazz does also welcome all, right? But that is not unsurprising to me as well. Coming from Black community, Black culture, obviously Black family myself, we are welcoming. I would also say with the expectation that the culture, and community continue to be honored.
From your perspective, how do you feel like the tenets of jazz or the African American culture, how do you feel it shows up in the music, from its inception, but also through its like travel, like you said, and now it's a global, it's been a global phenomenon, and it continues to be.
Continues to be. I think that when we think about African American or Black American art forms, there is going to be a connectedness, throughout all of the genres that we would consider or fall under that umbrella often of what we're talking about, Black music or Black, specifically, we're thinking about African American or Black American music. So you are going to have elements, whether it is jazz or hip hop or the blues or R&B or gospel or spiritual. You will have elements that exist in all of these genres in some way, shape, or the other. Not necessarily the same way, but for example, call and response, or the art of signifying, being highly referential, the ideas of, movement being implied, like music and dance being inextricably linked, whether dance is happening necessarily or not. Because remember, early on in jazz, it's a form of dance music. Now, maybe people aren't dancing as much anymore. I think they should. To jazz, but it's also social, right? So it's communal in that way, and so much more. So I think what you're going to get, and as an ethnomusicologist, we definitely think about and consider music as a social process. So if it's in the music, it's in the culture, and this is something that is simultaneously happening constantly all the time. So the ideals of any culture, of a people, of a community, their ideals, their aesthetics, their values, what have you, their history,
Mhm.
their lived experiences over several generations, especially when you have art forms that go on for several generations, all of that is going to be in the music. So that's true if we're talking about, New Orleans, the Mississippi Delta, and and on. That's going to be true whether we are talking about forms of indigenous music in Australia or Balinese gamelan. It's going to be true in Cuba. It's going to be true, in Poland. It's true everywhere, right? But we're interested in how and what is true in this case, and what we're talking about is jazz and Black music.
With the culture, like Black American culture, and then with the extension and with all the different branches, how do you see jazz show up and manifest itself in the space
And in community?
and community? Yeah.
Gosh, I could tell you, I mean, a personal story here.
Okay.
Oh, maybe two that are coming up. I remember listening to my father and his brothers, my uncles, when they would just have conversations and they would just start shooting off, joking, the way the flow, the melodies that would come up in these conversations, the jokes, the inside jokes. I mean, sometimes it would sound like they were trained eights or trained fours. I don't know how totally to describe that, but I could hear it. Or sometimes I could see in the types of walks and strides that come up in my community. We're here in Harlem, okay? So, and one of the many things that go on to create the Harlem that we know and love today, a lot of times, of course, we're going to point back to the Harlem Renaissance. Is that the very, very first beginning of Harlem? No, but Harlem Renaissance, what happens during Harlem Renaissance is absolutely an outcome of Black culture and community and people operating, right, in community together. The musicians, the intellectuals, the writers, right, the painters, the domestic workers, right, everybody, right, that goes to create what we know and feel. You can feel walking down any street in Harlem today, no matter the year. It's palpable, right? And jazz very much had a lot to do with that, right? But it wasn't jazz happening over here. Jazz was in community, and the community was in, because these musicians, these artists were in the community, right? I noticed that you have some archives here from rent parties. Here in the museum, Frisk and the Whiskers, right?
Yeah.
And so rent parties are very pragmatic. They're also very communal, right? I'm a little short this month, but you're not judging me, right? You come over, they're gonna have food or whatever. Everybody's gonna put a little bit in this. I'm gonna be able to make rent, and then if you find yourself in that circumstance, then I'm showing up in the same way. But also, you're having music happen in these spaces, right? In these residential spaces. We're not even getting to what happens in the venues in the club yet. So we're talking about residential homes. And some styles of piano, for example, are being developed, right, during these rent parties that go on to impact, the art form and the genre as well. So I don't know. Like, I think that, I mean, of course, I do understand or feel jazz is everywhere. And since jazz has been, right, since jazz has been, and it's very much in our community and in our communal spaces and contributed to it as that community and that culture also contribute to how jazz is. And I don't think those things ever stop.
That leads me to another question, which
Yeah.
is so interesting because it's the flip side. I always think about the heads and tail or like the negative of a picture, you know.
Yeah.
So that's like how, okay, that's the infiltration of community, right? Or jazz into community and just the whole concept of jazz itself, right?
Yeah.
But then if we go into the music,
Uh-huh.
right? How does community show up in the music?
Well, I think in the culture of performance, of course, like first of all, one, you have to listen. That's just music in general.
Mhm.
You are going to have band leaders, for example, if you want to think about band, but every voice is to be heard. Every voice is often getting their moment to be heard, but also they are co-creating, right? In that moment. So while yes, you could know what we're playing, we understand, we know what the set list is, but still the coming together, the collaborative or the collaboration, right? That is very much is happening in a communal way, right? Where if you and while you're listening, and some of the things that can make jazz so enjoyable is also the communication that's happening between the artist while they are on stage or while they're performing, and tuning into that, and also the way that audience is involved in that as well. But ultimately, it is going to be communal. It could often be democratic as well, if you want to put that, or not so hierarchical, if you will. But at the end of the day, who's playing jazz by themselves? That sounds, yeah, no, I don't know how that would sound, right? We're doing it collaboratively, collectively, and there has to be communication for that to happen. And a personal experience of mine, as a child, once the adults and actually my great aunt Odessa, we called her great aunt Des, and she lived in Houston, Texas, and when they saw that I was taking to music, specifically a violin, and I wouldn't quite put this instrument down, but I didn't have my own yet. And so she found a way to make it so that I could have my own instrument eventually. And how that happened was because of community. She went to church with a man who would be known during his time in the as a jazz player, but then he became an educator as well, Skeets Talbert, right?
Okay.
But he would have been retired. I think had also been a professor and had a music store in Houston, Texas, but he had since retired. I just remember going to his house and like the garage door opening, and it was all these instruments, and just kind of sitting there, which was kind of like, just for me, that would have been my kid in a candy shop moment. And that man made sure that I had an instrument in my hand. So I will always say also, specifically, jazz gave me my violin. That's how it made sure that I had an instrument in my hand, just because I loved it. And he was a jazz musician and used to play with maybe like Fats Waller and people like that, right? And of course, also jazz gave me literal family members that I love and adore, and I'm grateful for as well. So yes, there is some personal things
Yeah.
there, but I do think about that. Jazz. There's ways that jazz gave me family, community, and even music on my own.
The gift that just keeps
It
giving.
does. And good music to listen to.